It's never as simple as it seems, is it? Jessica thought to herself as she wiped a streak of sweat off her forehead. She was getting used to the ache in her bones. The tiredness was a part of her now, like the endless hours at work or the lingering feeling of fear she couldn't shake. But tonight was different. Tonight, the tension in the air felt heavier. The Grande Hotel, where she worked as a waitress, had never felt as intimidating as it did now. The soft hum of music from the grand piano mingled with the chatter of Manhattan's elite, their laughter echoing through the grand hall like they owned the world. But Jessica knew better. She knew the truth behind the gleaming smiles and polished shoes. It was a world that never noticed her, and she was okay with that. At least, she used to be. Then, a man caught her eye. He wasn't like the others. His presence was different, calm, controlled, almost unnerving. Dominic Giordano. The name rang a bell in her head, but she couldn't place it. He was tall, his dark hair slicked back, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that looked like it cost more than her entire apartment. The man oozed power. He moved through the room as if he owned it, every eye in the place turning to watch him. She had seen powerful people before, corporate tycoons, politicians, celebrities, but none like him. He was different. When their eyes met, it was like the rest of the room faded away. Her heartbeat quickened, and for a brief moment, she wondered if she had imagined it. But no, his gaze held hers, unwavering. It was almost like he knew her. She quickly looked away, pretending to focus on the tray of drinks in her hands. She was used to being invisible, to blending into the background, but something about this man made her feel seen. As she weaved through the crowd, her mind raced. Why did he look at her like that? What was it about her that drew his attention? She couldn't let her guard down. Not here, not with him. She had worked too hard to get where she was, and there was no way she was going to let some man, no matter how intimidating, mess that up. Still, his gaze lingered in her mind, like a weight she couldn't shake. And when she refilled his glass later that evening, the words slipped out before she could stop them. "Can I get you anything else, Mr. Giordano?" Her voice was steady, professional, but her heart was hammering in her chest. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied her, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he were trying to figure her out. And then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he said, "You're not like the others." His voice was low, smooth, with an accent she couldn't quite place. It was a statement, not a question. And it sent a chill down her spine. She swallowed, unsure of how to respond. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Giordano," she replied, her hands trembling slightly as she set the bottle of wine down. But he wasn't fooled. His lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "You're more than just that, Jessica." She froze. How did he know her name? She hadn't told him. She hadn't told anyone. The world around her seemed to slow down, the noise of the party fading into the background. Her breath caught in her throat as she looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. There was something in his eyes. Something calculating. And something else. Something that made her heart skip a beat. She felt a shiver run down her spine, but she couldn't look away. He didn't break eye contact, as if he were waiting for something. She had to leave. She had to get away from him before this feeling, this connection, pulled her under. But her legs felt like they were made of lead, and before she knew it, she was standing there, frozen in place. "You're mine now," he whispered, barely audible over the music. His words were soft but carried an undeniable weight. Jessica's stomach churned. What did he mean by that? She opened her mouth to protest, but no sound came out. Her mind raced, but the words didn't form. She was trapped in his gaze, trapped in this moment. She had to get out. But for some reason, she didn't want to. She took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. "I don't belong to anyone," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. He chuckled softly, his gaze never leaving hers. "We'll see about that." She quickly turned away. Desperate to escape the suffocating pull of his presence. As she walked back to the kitchen, her mind was spinning. What had just happened? Why did she feel like she had just walked into a world she wasn't ready for? And why, despite everything, did she feel a strange pull to him, to Dominic Giordano? She shook her head, trying to clear the thoughts clouding her mind. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just changed forever. Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in her life, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She moved through the motions of her job, but it all felt distant now. The sound of silverware clinking against fine china, the low hum of polite conversations, the swirl of champagne in crystal flutes, it was all a blur, an empty routine. But Dominic's words echoed in her mind, his eyes still haunting her thoughts. "You're mine now." The words kept circling, like a song she couldn't escape. She had tried to push them away, to focus on the task at hand, but his gaze had been searing, and his presence, overwhelming. She had never felt more exposed, more vulnerable, and yet, there was something else, something she hadn't expected. A pull. A curiosity. She told herself she couldn't afford to be drawn in by this man. She had worked too hard, struggled too much, to let a stranger disrupt the fragile life she had built. But even as she mentally scolded herself, the pull only grew stronger. Hours later, after the last guest had left the grand ballroom and the staff was preparing to close for the night, Jessica finally let herself breathe. The weight on her chest, which had been there all evening, lifted slightly. She was alone in the quiet, and she felt a strange sense of relief. At least, she thought she did. She moved to the back hallway to gather her things, her mind still racing with thoughts of him. Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting another reminder of her overdue bills, but instead, it was a message from Carmen, her best friend. "Don't forget, you're working tomorrow night. Make sure you're here on time. Big event. VIP guests." Jessica sighed. Another busy night. Another night of blending into the background, of being invisible. It was how she preferred it. Still, her thoughts kept drifting back to Dominic. Why had he said those words to her? Was he just being his usual, imposing self? Or was there something more to it? She had to admit, she couldn't get him out of her mind. That unsettling mix of power and intrigue. His presence was different from anyone else she had ever encountered. As she stood in front of her locker, staring at her reflection in the mirror, she caught a glimpse of her own tired eyes. She hadn't slept much in the past few days, juggling the demands of her job and the burden of her personal life. Her bruises, hidden beneath layers of makeup, seemed to mock her. She wasn't the type to ask for help, never had been. But in the stillness of that moment, she wondered if she was at a crossroads. Maybe this was her chance for something more. Maybe it was time to stop running from life and start facing it. With a shake of her head, she grabbed her things and walked out, her heart still pounding, but now with a sense of urgency she hadn't felt before. The night air was cold against her skin as she stepped outside, the city's lights flickering in the distance. Her mind was still tangled with thoughts of Dominic, but she knew one thing for sure, she couldn't ignore him. Not anymore. The next night, she arrived at work early, her nerves already frayed before the evening rush. She tried to focus on her tasks, but her mind kept wandering back to the man who had made her feel like she mattered in a way that no one else had. He was there again, sitting at the same table, surrounded by the usual guests. She tried to keep her distance, to pretend she wasn't affected by his presence, but the truth was, she was drawn to him. It wasn't just his wealth or his power, it was the way he carried himself, the way he looked at her as though he knew something she didn't. As the evening wore on, she found herself walking past his table more than once, each time feeling the weight of his gaze on her. She couldn't explain why, but there was something about him that made her feel both terrified and alive. Then, just as she was about to pass him again, he spoke. "Come here." His voice was low, commanding. She froze, her heart racing. She had no choice but to obey. As she approached, he motioned for her to sit down. She hesitated, but then the power of his presence pulled her in. "We need to talk," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. Jessica sat down, trying to steady her breathing. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and she felt a knot in her stomach that she couldn't ignore. She knew she was walking into something that could change everything. But for some reason, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. Not this time. Jessica sat across from Dominic, the weight of his presence pressing down on her like a heavy blanket. Her mind raced, the familiar hum of the restaurant now a distant noise in the background. She could feel his eyes on her, intense, studying her every move. Her palms were sweating, her heart pounding in her chest. What did he want, she wondered, trying to keep her composure. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving hers. "I didn't expect you to sit," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "But you did." "Why?" Jessica swallowed hard. She wasn't sure how to respond. The air between them felt thick, charged with something she couldn't name. She wasn't used to being the center of anyone's attention, let alone someone like him. She'd spent most of her life fading into the background, making herself small so no one would notice her. But tonight, she felt the opposite. He was noticing her. And she didn't know whether to run or stay. "I thought you'd want to speak," she replied, her voice shaky despite her best efforts to sound confident. Dominic's lips curved into a slight smile, a look that both intrigued and unsettled her. "I do," he said, his tone still smooth, measured. "But I also want to understand why someone like you is here." She frowned. "Someone like me," she echoed, unsure if she was offended or simply confused. Dominic didn't answer right away. He studied her, his sharp eyes scanning her face, taking in every detail. It made her uncomfortable, but at the same time, she couldn't look away. "You're not like the others," he finally said. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jessica's mind raced. Was he talking about the other waitresses? The other women she'd seen him with? She didn't know. "I'm just here to do my job," she said, her voice firm now, though her hand still trembled. Dominic leaned forward slightly, the movement so subtle yet so deliberate. "I know," he said. "But that's not why I asked you to sit." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. She felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't tell if he was being sincere or if this was all some twisted game. "Why did you ask me, then?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Because I want to understand what you're running from," he said, his voice low and almost caring. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't used to people caring about her. Most days, it felt like she was invisible, just another person in the background. But there was something about the way Dominic spoke that made her feel seen. For a moment, she almost forgot to breathe. "I'm not running," she said, though her voice wavered. Dominic raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice soft but insistent. The question hung in the air, and for the first time in a long while, Jessica felt like she couldn't hide. He was right. She was running. Running from the past. Running from the life she couldn't escape. But what was she supposed to do now? "I'm here because I need the money," she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "But that doesn't mean I'm running." Dominic didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair again, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. "I know," he said after a moment. "But you're not just here for the money, are you?" Jessica's heart skipped a beat. What was he trying to say? What did he know? He wasn't supposed to know anything about her. She had kept her secrets for so long. She had buried them deep inside, where no one could find them. But Dominic wasn't just anyone. He was different. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice strained. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. He knew more than she could ever admit. And somehow, that scared her more than anything. Dominic's smile faded, and for a moment, his expression softened. "You're stronger than you think," he said, his voice quieter now, almost like a whisper. "You just don't realize it yet." Jessica swallowed hard. Was he trying to comfort her? Or was this all part of some plan? I don't need your help, she said, her voice sharper now. She couldn't let him get too close. Not now, not when everything was already starting to unravel. Dominic didn't react to her words. Instead, he stood up slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. Maybe you don't need help, he said quietly, but you're going to get it anyway. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the quiet room. Jessica watched him go, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to think, what to feel. But one thing was certain, this was only the beginning. Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. She spent the next few days trying to return to her routine, to the predictable rhythm of work and solitude, but everything felt different now. Every glance in her direction, every shift in the air around her, felt amplified. And every time she thought of Dominic, that unsettling mix of curiosity and fear stirred in her chest. It was a feeling she wasn't used to, being seen, truly seen, by someone like him. The days passed slowly, and yet, the thought of him lingered like a shadow, following her every step. She had told herself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment of tension, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. He had been different from everyone else. He had made her feel something she hadn't felt in years, important. For someone like her, someone who had always stayed in the background, that was an impossible thing to ignore. One evening, as the soft music played in the background and the guests of the restaurant murmured in polite conversation, she spotted him again. Dominic was sitting at the same table, surrounded by his usual entourage, but this time, something about him seemed different. He wasn't just the cold, calculating man she had met before. There was something softer in his eyes, something that made her want to know more. She told herself not to look, but she couldn't help it. Her eyes found him across the room, and before she knew it, he was looking at her. The same intense gaze that had unsettled her before, now held a different kind of weight. It wasn't just curiosity. It was like he was waiting for something. Waiting for her. Her heart raced, and she forced herself to look away, but the pull of his gaze was undeniable. She had to keep her composure. She had to do her job. But as she made her way to his table, her hands trembled. "Can I get you anything else, Mr. Giordano?" she asked, her voice steady despite the anxiety building in her chest. He smiled, that same small, knowing smile. "You're still avoiding me, Jessica," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I told you we needed to talk." Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him to call her out like that, not so directly. "I'm not avoiding you," she said, trying to keep her voice even. But she could hear the lie in her words. She had been avoiding him, hadn't she? She had been trying to push him out of her mind, trying to tell herself that he was just another powerful man in a world full of them. But Dominic wasn't like the others. "Then let's talk," he said, his tone not demanding, but insistent. "Come sit down." She hesitated, her body betraying her. Everything in her told her to walk away, to keep her distance. But something inside her, something she couldn't name, made her step forward. She sat down across from him, her heart hammering in her chest. Dominic didn't waste any time. "I've been watching you, Jessica," he said, his voice low. "I can see the way you carry yourself. You think you're invisible, but you're not." Her throat went dry. How much did he know? "I'm just doing my job," she said, trying to sound confident. But the words felt weak, hollow even. "You're doing more than that," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're trying to survive. And that's why I'm here." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. "Survive," she repeated, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Yes," Dominic said, leaning forward slightly. "You think I don't know what it's like to be trapped in a life you can't escape? To feel like you're fighting a battle every day just to stay afloat?" She stared at him, speechless. "I see the strength in you," he continued, his voice softening. "But I also see the fear. And I know what it's like to let that fear control you." Jessica didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to this, people seeing her, really seeing her. She had spent so long hiding, pretending that everything was fine, that she didn't need anyone. But here, in front of Dominic, it was impossible to hide. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dominic smiled again, but it wasn't the same smile he had given her before. This one was softer, more sincere. "Nothing," he said. "At least, not yet. But I want you to know that you're not alone. I know what it's like to feel like you're drowning, Jessica. And I'm not going to let you drown." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Jessica didn't know what to make of them, but something inside her shifted. For the first time in a long time, she felt like someone understood. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like it was okay to let someone in. But could she trust him? That was the question she couldn't answer. And the one she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Jessica's mind was spinning as she left the restaurant that night. Dominic's words had stuck with her, echoing in her head as she made her way down the dark streets of Manhattan. "You're not alone." It was a simple phrase, but for some reason, it carried weight, like a promise she wasn't sure she could trust. She walked faster, trying to outrun the thoughts that kept creeping up on her. The world around her felt blurry, as if she were living in a dream. Her apartment wasn't far, but the weight of the evening was pressing down on her, making her feel like it would take forever to get there. As she rounded the corner to her building, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart racing in anticipation. It was a message from Carmen. "I've been hearing rumors." Carmen's message. "Read. You okay?" "Something's off." Jessica's fingers hovered over the screen for a moment, unsure of how to respond. She wasn't ready to talk about Dominic, not yet. Not when she wasn't even sure what to think herself. But Carmen had a way of sensing when something was wrong, and Jessica couldn't lie to her. She typed a quick response. "I'm fine. Just tired. I'll see you tomorrow." She hit send before she could change her mind, then slipped her phone back into her pocket. The last thing she needed right now was to discuss Dominic or the way his presence seemed to affect her. She was too confused, too conflicted. Her fingers brushed against the door handle of her apartment building, but before she could open it, she froze. The feeling of being watched washed over her, that familiar, unsettling sensation that had become all too familiar lately. She glanced around the street, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the figure standing a few yards away. Dominic. He was leaning casually against a lamppost, his dark eyes fixed on her. The light from the street lamps cast a soft glow on his face, and for a moment, everything around them seemed to disappear. The world felt suspended, like time had stopped. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic straightened up, pushing off the lamppost as he took a step closer. "I could ask you the same thing," he said, his tone light but with a hint of something more serious behind it. "I told you we needed to talk." Jessica swallowed hard. "I don't think now is the right time," she said, though the words felt hollow. Deep down, she knew that if she didn't confront whatever was happening between them, it would only continue to haunt her. But she wasn't ready. Not tonight. Dominic seemed to understand, but his gaze didn't waver. "We'll talk when you're ready," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "But just so you know, I'm not going anywhere." The finality of his words sent a chill down her spine. She wasn't sure if it was a promise or a warning, but it didn't matter. He was right. He wasn't going anywhere. And for some reason, that thought made her feel both terrified and oddly relieved. She stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do, before finally pushing the door open and stepping inside. The warm air of her apartment greeted her, but it did nothing to ease the tension in her chest. She locked the door behind her, leaning against it for a moment, her heart still racing. She had no idea what was happening, but she knew one thing for sure: her life was changing. And it had everything to do with Dominic Giordano. As she made her way to the small kitchen, she poured herself a glass of water, her hands shaking slightly. She needed to think, to make sense of everything that had happened. She needed to figure out why she was so drawn to him, why his presence felt so powerful, so overwhelming. But as she sat down on the couch, staring at the glass in her hands, she realized that she wasn't sure if she wanted to figure it out at all. Part of her wanted to push him away, to keep him at arm's length. But another part of her, a part she couldn't quite explain, wanted to know more. She closed her eyes, rubbing her temples, trying to clear her mind. The exhaustion from the day was beginning to set in, and she needed rest. But sleep didn't come easy. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. His eyes. His smile. The way he had looked at her like she was the only person in the room. She couldn't escape him. And in some strange way, she didn't want to. The thought was unsettling, but it was the truth. As she finally drifted off to sleep, one question lingered in her mind: what was Dominic Giordano really after? And why did it feel like he was about to change her life forever? The days that followed felt like a blur. Jessica couldn't concentrate, her thoughts constantly drifting back to Dominic and the weight of his presence. It was as though he had become a part of her life without even trying. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was always there, even when he wasn't. At work, her interactions with him were brief but charged with an intensity she couldn't explain. Every time their eyes met, it was as if time slowed down, the noise of the restaurant fading into the background. The weight of his gaze made her heart race, and no matter how hard she tried to focus on her tasks, she found herself drawn to him. She had told herself that she didn't need him in her life, that she could keep her distance and go on with her work, but it was harder than she thought. One evening, as the restaurant began to fill with the usual crowd of well-dressed patrons, Jessica was caught off guard when Dominic appeared at the door. His usual entourage was nowhere to be seen, and for a brief moment, she wondered if he was there for something else. "You're here early," she said, trying to sound casual as she approached him. Dominic gave her that same smile, the one that made her heart flutter despite herself. "I couldn't wait," he said, his voice smooth, low. "I've been thinking about our conversation." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. The conversation. The one where he had made her feel things she wasn't ready to acknowledge. "I told you," she said, trying to regain some sense of control. "I'm not interested in, I know what you said," Dominic interrupted gently. "But I think you are. You just don't want to admit it." Jessica felt her pulse quicken. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to be dragged back into the world that Dominic represented. "I'm just here to do my job," she said firmly, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her notepad. "Nothing more." Dominic's expression softened, but there was a sharpness behind his eyes that she couldn't ignore. "I respect that," he said, his voice sincere. "But you should know that I'm not going to let you walk away so easily." His words hung in the air, leaving a chill in their wake. Jessica's heart was racing, and she found herself at a loss for words. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond. She had always been able to control her life, to keep it predictable, safe. But Dominic was a force that didn't allow for that. He was different from anything she had ever known. She took a deep breath and forced herself to speak. "I don't need saving," she said, the words coming out with more conviction than she felt. Dominic's gaze softened again, and for a moment, she saw something in his eyes, something vulnerable. "I'm not trying to save you," he said, his tone quieter now. "I'm just trying to be here for you. You don't have to do everything on your own, Jessica. You don't have to carry the weight of the world." Jessica's chest tightened. She didn't know how to respond to that. She had spent her whole life carrying everything on her own, fighting battles no one else could see. But the idea of letting someone else help her, letting someone else in, it was terrifying. She had never allowed herself to be vulnerable, not to anyone. She didn't know how to be. "I don't know what you want from me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. "I want nothing more than to see you happy," he said simply. "I want you to stop fighting alone." Jessica's heart pounded in her chest, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. It was fleeting, but it was there. Maybe Dominic was right. Maybe she didn't have to carry everything on her own. But the thought of opening up, of letting him in, was terrifying. She had built walls around herself for so long, and they were strong. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to let them come down. "I can't promise anything," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "But I'll think about it." Dominic smiled, and there was something in his expression that made her heart skip a beat. "That's all I ask," he said. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." Jessica nodded, though she wasn't sure if that was a promise or a threat. She turned away, her thoughts racing as she moved back to her duties. But even as she tried to focus on her work, she knew that things had changed. Dominic was a part of her life now, whether she liked it or not. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure if she wanted to walk away. Jessica stood outside the restaurant, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and uncertainty. The air was cool, and the hum of the city felt distant, almost muffled. She had never expected things to go this way. When she had first started working at the restaurant, she had kept her head down, focused on doing her job and nothing more. She had never imagined a man like Dominic Giordano would come into her life and turn everything upside down. But now, as she walked to her car, his words kept echoing in her mind. "I'm not going anywhere." His voice, so calm and unwavering, had stirred something in her, a feeling she couldn't quite understand. It wasn't just the fact that he was persistent. It was the way he had made her feel seen, like she mattered in a world that often ignored her. She had spent years building walls, hiding behind her job, pretending that everything was fine. But Dominic, with his calm authority and his unnerving presence, had found a way to break through those walls. And she hated him for it. Or maybe, just maybe, she didn't. She slid into her car and started the engine humming to life as she drove through the familiar streets of the city. She couldn't stop thinking about him. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. His eyes. His smile. But there was something else there too, something that made her feel uneasy. A part of her wanted to push him away, to tell him that she didn't need his help, that she didn't want his attention. But another part of her, the part she had buried for so long, wanted to let him in. She didn't know what that meant, and she didn't know what it would cost her. But she couldn't deny that something was changing inside her. The more she thought about Dominic, the more she realized that he wasn't like the others. He wasn't just a man with power. He was different. And she was starting to wonder if maybe that difference was what she needed. She arrived at her apartment, the familiar surroundings doing little to ease the turmoil inside her. As she entered her small, cozy apartment, she set her bag down on the counter, her eyes drifting to the window. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but they did nothing to distract her from the chaos in her mind. She had always been in control of her life. She had always been able to keep things together, no matter what. But now, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something that could change everything. She couldn't keep running forever. She couldn't keep pretending that she was fine when she wasn't. And she knew that Dominic, with his unwavering presence and his insistence on being there for her, was somehow tied to it all. She walked to the small kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, trying to steady her breathing. The cool liquid felt good against her throat, but it did little to calm the racing thoughts in her head. She couldn't ignore him. She knew that now. But she also couldn't let him get too close. She had been hurt before, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to open herself up again. She didn't know if she could. But as she sat down on the couch, staring at the empty space in front of her, she realized that she wasn't alone. Not anymore. And that scared her more than anything. She thought about Dominic's words again. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." It was a promise, but was it a promise she could trust? Or was it something more, something she wasn't ready to face? As she stared at the blank TV screen, she felt the weight of the decision in front of her. She couldn't keep running. She couldn't keep pretending. She had to face it. She had to face him. And as terrifying as it was, she knew she couldn't do it alone. Jessica stood in front of her apartment window, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The city lights below twinkled, but her thoughts were far from the peaceful scene outside. Her mind kept replaying the events of the past week, the conversations with Dominic, the way he had looked at her, the words that seemed to linger in the air long after they were spoken. "I'm not going anywhere." It was a simple phrase, but it had stuck with her, gnawing at the back of her mind. What did he want from her? What was he really after? She had tried to push him away, to convince herself that he was just another powerful man with too much time on his hands. But every time she thought she had him figured out, he surprised her. The way he had been there for her, even when she didn't ask for help, was starting to change her. For so long, she had been on her own, never letting anyone in. But Dominic, with his quiet confidence and unspoken understanding, was beginning to break through the walls she had so carefully built. She turned away from the window, pacing the small apartment. She couldn't keep doing this. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. She couldn't keep running from the things that were starting to matter. As much as she wanted to deny it, as much as she wanted to push him away, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. The connection was undeniable, and no matter how hard she tried to fight it, it was growing stronger every day. She had tried to convince herself that it was just a passing attraction, that it was just her mind playing tricks on her. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. There was something about him, something that made her feel like she wasn't invisible for the first time in years. As she walked back to the couch, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She hesitated before picking it up, her heart racing when she saw the message. It was from Dominic. "We need to talk," it read. Her stomach flipped. She had been expecting this, but that didn't make it any easier. She had spent the last few days thinking about him, trying to convince herself that she could keep her distance. But now, his message felt like a challenge she couldn't ignore. She glanced at the clock, he would be waiting for her. She couldn't put it off any longer. She had to face whatever this was, face him. With a deep breath, she grabbed her coat and headed out the door. The drive to the restaurant was short, but the silence in the car was deafening. Her mind was racing, her thoughts a blur of uncertainty and fear. What was she going to say to him? What did he want from her? She didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to walk away. Not this time. When she arrived at the restaurant, she took a moment to compose herself before stepping inside. Dominic was already waiting, sitting at a table in the far corner, his eyes fixed on her as she approached. His gaze was intense, but there was something softer in his expression now. He wasn't just the intimidating figure he had been when they first met. There was a warmth to him now, a quiet understanding that made her want to stay. "You came," he said, his voice low but sincere. Jessica nodded, taking a seat across from him. The weight of his presence was overwhelming, but for some reason, she didn't want to look away. "I'm here," she said, her voice steady despite the nervousness swirling inside her. Dominic didn't speak right away. He simply watched her, his gaze never leaving hers. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he said, finally breaking the silence. "About what we're doing here." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to say that. She hadn't expected him to open up in this way. "I don't know what we're doing," she admitted, her voice soft. "I don't even know what I want anymore." Dominic's expression softened, and for a moment, Jessica saw something vulnerable in his eyes. "It's okay not to know," he said gently. "But what I do know is that you don't have to do this alone." His words hit her harder than she expected, the weight of them sinking into her chest. She wasn't used to being told that she didn't have to do everything by herself. It was a foreign concept, one she wasn't sure how to handle. "I'm not used to that," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I've always been on my own." Dominic reached across the table, his hand resting gently on hers. The touch was soft but firm, a reassurance she didn't know she needed. "You don't have to be anymore," he said quietly. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. She had never let anyone in, not like this. But something about Dominic, something about his calm presence, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be alone anymore. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. A spark of it. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough to start something new. Jessica sat across from Dominic, her mind racing with a mixture of uncertainty and unexpected calm. The restaurant was quieter now, the usual hum of activity slowing as the night wore on. The soft clink of glasses and murmurs of conversation faded into the background, leaving only the sound of their breathing and the weight of the moment. She had never imagined she'd be sitting here with him, talking about things she wasn't sure she was ready to face. "You've been quiet," Dominic said, his voice soft but steady. His eyes were fixed on hers, not in a way that made her feel uncomfortable, but with a depth that made her feel seen, really seen. "I don't know what to say," Jessica replied honestly. She had been wrestling with her own emotions all evening, trying to understand what was happening between them. "You don't have to say anything," Dominic said with a slight smile. "I just want you to know that I'm here." Jessica's heart fluttered in her chest, the simplicity of his words cutting through her usual defenses. She had spent so long convincing herself that she didn't need anyone, that she was fine on her own. But here, with Dominic, something felt different. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, this kind of care. She had never been shown the kind of vulnerability he was offering. And that scared her. "I've never been good at accepting help," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've always done things on my own." Dominic's gaze softened, and he reached across the table, his hand resting gently on hers. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through her, and she couldn't remember the last time someone had made her feel this way. "You don't have to do it all alone anymore," he said, his voice a reassuring balm to the tension in her chest. Jessica swallowed hard. She had never imagined she would find someone who made her question everything she thought she knew about herself. She had spent so much of her life hiding, keeping herself locked away in a cage of self-reliance. But Dominic made her feel like maybe, just maybe, it was okay to let go. To trust someone else. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been hurt before. I'm scared." Dominic didn't pull his hand away, but instead, he gently squeezed it, his touch grounding her. "I understand," he said softly. "You don't have to trust me all at once. I'm not asking for that. All I'm asking for is a chance. A chance to show you that you don't have to carry the weight alone anymore." The sincerity in his voice, the warmth in his eyes, made her heart ache. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, if she was ready to let someone in, to allow herself to be vulnerable. But something about Dominic made her feel like maybe it was worth the risk. Maybe it was worth giving him a chance. She took a deep breath and looked up at him, her eyes searching his for any sign of doubt, any sign that he wasn't being genuine. But all she saw was sincerity. "I don't know what comes next," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see where this goes." Dominic's smile was small but genuine. "That's all I'm asking for," he said. "We take it one step at a time." Jessica felt the weight of the word settle in her chest, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. She didn't have all the answers, and she wasn't sure what the future held. But for the first time in a while, she wasn't alone in her uncertainty. Dominic was there, offering her a chance to take a leap of faith, to step into a world she had been too afraid to enter. As they sat there, the quiet buzz of the restaurant now a distant hum, Jessica realized that the biggest risk she had ever taken wasn't in starting over in the city or in building her life from scratch. The biggest risk she had ever taken was allowing herself to trust again. And for the first time, she wasn't scared. She was ready.